this. Right? They're organized in a very mechanical, almost top-down fashion. And that's basically because what the author is doing is sorting the information into the cubby holes. Right? It's like a great sorting machine. You develop your text basically as you go through the process, seeking sources, tearing them apart, and put what relevant pieces right into the outline in such a way as to develop your text. Question?
How much of an outline can we make at the outset of our research without having as much information about, as you said, maybe our conclusion won't follow what we originally thought it would, or our findings will not exactly follow how
That's a good question. You never have enough information. You're never going to have all the information. And the reality is that your preliminary outline is exactly that. It's preliminary. It's tentative. Okay? So, generally speaking, I have urged that people make, as you can tell from the sequence of things, make a preliminary outline relatively early on in the process to kind of get an organizational dynamic, right? But you have to understand and you accept the fact that it is a fluid dynamic. It's not going to be cast in stone in any fashion. Okay? Most first-time thesis authors or project report authors are less methodical, right? That's what you're suggesting. It's most. So don't feel as though you're missing something if, in fact, somehow your brain's not functioning properly, you're having difficulty with this, right? All authors deal with it in some form or another. And it's just, as it says, largely because they're unsure where a subject is likely to fit until they've begun writing, right? In which case it says, to you. It'll talk back to you. The manuscript begins to develop before your very eyes. And it's the creative act that writing is, right? So it's important to remember that the outline you begin with is likely to change. Even Rembrandt is known to have varied his final painting from the initial charcoal sketch, right? Because we've x-rayed, right, Rembrandt, and we see that, that's not what he had originally intended at all. Something happened, right? Maybe the model had hiccups, whatever, right? But it changed. Miscellaneous research hints. And these are hints. One of the most unnecessary, time-consuming aspects of thesis writing or project reviewing is to be eliminated in your research phase by making tracks in your thesis notes or research notes. Whether they're handwritten or word processed, keep a record of where you found the research material, where the material came from, and when. Not just on what book it comes from or what periodical or archival collection, but where you encountered it last on the shelf, in the closet, in any particular location as the case may be, right? Your understanding of the topic you have chosen will be advanced if you can find a network of like-minded people to help you, right? To select what it is that's most appropriate. And there are all sorts of chat lines and discussion groups that deal with these issues. Now, in the first paragraph, this question of making tracks. I'll give you an example. Once upon a time when the earth was flat and I was writing my dissertation, I had need of a particular periodical which I had seen on the shelves of the Boston Public Library, and it was the only copy of this periodical that existed. It's in the special collections of the Boston Public Library. And I said, well, secure, shouldn't have any problem, right? Well, 2 years later, I went back, and they said, we can't find this. I had driven it from here to there, specifically, for that particular periodical. It was the only periodical that existed. True story. Well, as you can imagine, it's 6 hours and 15 minutes there, it's 6 hours and 15 minutes back, and I was pissed. I was absolutely pissed. But I began to get suspicious. And as it turns out, somebody who had worked in the Boston Public Library happened to have been a PhD student, just like me. Right? And he had borrowed this material, right? And I, being the suspicious character I was, let it be known through my advisor and other advisors, right, that I was looking for this journal. And what do you know? One of my friends who was doing a cocktail party in New York City, right, spied on the shelf of a friend of his the very same unique periodical set. Well, as you can imagine, the FBI, who carries forward interstate transgressions of this kind, had an interesting time in doing the interviews, and subsequently this journal was returned to the Boston Public Library, but not before so many people associated with this particular journal's provenance in Boston were embarrassed. Were it not for the fact that I had done my homework about where it was and knew the cluster of individuals that I could ask who would be knowledgeable about this particular journal, I would have been lost. And it was a chapter of my dissertation that I was not about to give up easily, as you can imagine. Right? Making tracks in your notes about where the material is found and building a group of people who are confidants and knowledgeable outside the university and the topic of your particular specialization is normal professional activity. Right? Careful, though, about making tracks. I don't want you to have to drive to Boston back. Not in the winter, not in any other time. Oral history begins with an interview, of course, to record a person's recollection, and ends with the acceptance of the transcript. Notice the beginning and the end. This is for people who are doing oral history that are going to depend on it as part of their report. If you are simply talking to a professional on an isolated issue that is embedded in some aspect of your report or thesis, it's not a big issue, right? But if you are going to rely upon this person's words for the construction of your argument contiguously or in various places throughout the work, you owe it to have that individual review the transcript and approve it, right? And comment on it if necessary. Now, for work that involves human subjects, at the bottom, I note this. Cornell has an office dedicated to reviewing the legal implications of the effort. Let me say a little bit about that, because a lot of you who get involved with this sort of research are looking at the graduate school's regulations, and you assume that you have to go to the university for approval to do normal professional, basically conduct professional discussions. And that's not the case. The purpose of the university's stipulation is to make sure that human subjects, that is, if you're studying humans, like bugs, right? That the bugs, are properly given their due to complain or agree, right? So that there is a procedure for making sure that your human subjects are aware of what it is that you're going to do by virtue of the invasiveness in their personal lives. Professional activities, for the most part, lie outside of using people as bugs. That's generally associated with anthropology, right? And sociology, and psychology, the social sciences. To the degree that you are becoming a social scientist, be aware that these regulations exist, these procedures exist, but don't get bound up in the fact that you've got to, go through the university's hoops necessarily, unless there's reason for it. And it varies for each of you. I don't know what your projects are likely to be. I'm just providing you with the parameters, the broad parameters for what it is that you're likely to encounter. Question? Yep.
Not so much a question, but having gone through that process also allow a lot of time for that review to take place. It's not a thing you can just pick up on your way out to do an interview. It takes weeks sometimes. And
Yes.
depending on what the verdict is, you might have to take classes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very good question. And for the members of the viewing audience, the question was to be aware of the fact that it takes time to go through the process, if in fact that is something that you're going to do. It's not, as you said, something, a form that you could just simply pick up and fill in and deposit easily, right? Absolutely the case. There have been months where there has been further investigation of the alternatives, and the legal beagles here at the university get into the details of what it is your research is likely to be. And in many cases, of course, you don't know what your research is likely to be yet. So they ask another set of questions. Good comment, thank you. Handy thesis sheet number 203, footnotes or endnotes.